Well, no reporter has a stranger working relationship with Donald Trump than our first guest tonight, Maggie Haberman. Donald Trump has both attacked Maggie Haberman, and I mean viciously attacked her, and granted her exclusive interviews. No reporter has covered Donald Trump longer than Maggie Haberman. When Maggie Haberman began her career at the New York Post in 1996, Donald Trump was a New York real estate developer desperately trying to push his name into the Post's gossip columns 8 years before NBC gave Donald Trump a TV show and increased his fame exponentially. And no one conducted a better television interview of Donald Trump in Donald Trump's first term than our other first guest tonight, Jonathan Swan.
Mr. President, the other day a reporter asked you about Ghislaine Maxwell. You said, quote, "I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, but I wish her well, whatever it is." Mr. President, Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested on allegations of child sex trafficking. Why would you wish such a person well?
First of all, I don't know that, but I do know that
she has. She's been arrested for that. You know that.
Her friend or boyfriend,
Epstein,
was either killed or committed suicide in jail. She's now in jail. Yeah, I wish her well. I'd wish you well. I'd wish a lot of people well. Good luck. Let them prove somebody was guilty. I mean, do you know that?
Oh, so you're saying you hope she doesn't die in jail? Is that what you mean by wish her well?
Her boyfriend died in jail, and people are still trying to figure out, how did it happen? Was it suicide? Was he killed? And I do wish her well. I'm not looking for anything bad for her. I'm not looking bad for anybody. And they took that and
she's a child sex, alleged child sex trafficker.
Big deal. But all it is her boyfriend died. He died in jail. Was he killed? Was it suicide? I do. I wish her well.
That's how you do it. Jonathan Swan deservedly won an Emmy for that interview. Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, now colleagues at the New York Times, have teamed up to deliver the most important look inside the Trump White House in the second term under the title Regime Change Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. They conducted over 1,000 interviews for this book, with Donald Trump granting them an exclusive interview at the very last minute in March of this year as the book was headed to publication. The interview was on a Monday in March. And 3 days before welcoming them into the Oval Office, Donald Trump posted this on social media. Maggot Haberman, just another sleazebag writer for the failing New York Times, insists on writing false stories about me, even though she fully knows and understands that the exact opposite of anything she says is usually the truth. In any event, I'm thinking of adding Maggot and some of her associates into my Florida-based lawsuit against the Times, which very happily seems to be proceeding nicely. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And so, how were these two reporters greeted in the Oval Office just 3 days after Donald Trump spewed that vile poison at Maggie Haberman? Did he use that horrible nickname? Did he call her a sleazebag? No. Trump entered the Oval Office from the corridor connected to his private dining room. He was in smiling salesman mode. "Nice to see you," he said, gesturing for us all to sit down opposite him at the desk. It was the 17th day of his war with Iran. 13 American service members had already been killed, and more than 200 had been wounded. Thousands of Iranians were dead, including the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The Pentagon had already spent more than $15 billion, and the Strait of Hormuz was largely closed, sending global oil prices surging. The day before, Trump had made a demand for an international coalition of warships to secure the waterway, but few nations seemed interested in helping. This was hardly surprising. Trump had spent the previous year mocking NATO, bypassing the United Nations, and making clear that alliances were, in his view, either protection rackets or obstacles. The nations he was now calling on for help were the same ones he had bullied with tariffs, threatened with territorial claims, and cut out of major decisions like the one he had just made to wage war against Iran. As he greeted us, the war seemed the furthest thing from Trump's mind. On the Resolute desk, instead of a map of the Middle East, were printouts of maple trees. "I'm ordering trees for the White House," Trump told us. "I know how to buy good trees. Maples. Trump held out another printout. The headline screamed 339 billion all-time views of Trump TikToks. Can you believe it, the president asked us? Then Trump showed us two final printouts, rendering from different angles of the grand ballroom he was building on the White House grounds. He was in a convivial mood. The structure would have 10 columns on one facade, he said, modeled on the Roman style, and the other side would be inspired by Athens. He noted with evident satisfaction that the columns were larger than those of the Supreme Court. Behind the scenes, some of his aides had told us they wished Trump was more anxious about the dangers he was courting and about his plunging poll numbers. The president's pollster, Tony Fabrizio, summarized findings from 2 nights of focus groups conducted earlier in March. The first fell on the very same day we sat looking at Trump's maple tree printouts in the Oval Office. The results were bracing. The war in Iran was unpopular, poorly understood, and seen as a broken campaign promise that was distracting the president from the economy and health care. The military action lacked a clear rationale, and voters saw negative economic consequences downstream of the conflict, compounding the affordability crisis that was already their top concern about the Trump presidency. Perhaps most distressing for the Trump team, the Epstein files came up consistently in focus groups and were a real negative with some of these voters. But Trump was uninterested in such feedback. To the extent he still cared about polling at all, he was seeing far fewer polls than during his first term. His advisors knew he was not receptive to being briefed on harsh realities. In his second term, unlike his first, he was willing to take breathtaking risks, risks that could throw not only his presidency, but the Republican Party and the entire world into chaos and carnage. More than ever before as president, he was operating on pure gut instinct. It would take a combination of mind reader and psychologist to explain fully why Trump was willing to gamble so much more recklessly now. There were obvious theories. He was term limited and no longer had to worry about re-election. He had immunity confirmed by the Supreme Court and no longer had to worry about prosecutions. He was more confident in his instincts. He had already served a presidential term and had felt vindicated so often. And there was the fact that he was a walking moral hazard, rarely saddled for long with the costs or consequences of his risk-taking and rule-breaking. Now was his moment to try things like military adventures and overthrowing the global trade system. Joining us now, New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning correspondent Maggie Haberman and her co-author, New York Times reporter Jonathan Swan, whose new book is Regime Change Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. Maggie, I have to begin with you. And what is going on with you and Donald Trump? The world wonders about this because we've seen for years these vicious, and that last, I apologize for reading that one, but I had to set that stage for our audience. The viciousness of that. 3 days before you walk into the Oval Office. Did you already have the Oval Office appointment booked when he wrote that?
We did, and it was actually the first time that there had been one of those in some time. And thank you again for having us, Lawrence, and talking about the reporting for this book, which we really broke ourselves working on and are quite proud of. The only way that I can describe that action is a hip check, right, ahead of this interview. He was essentially trying to lay down a marker. Some people told us that people we had fact-checked different material with had gotten him spun up and in a heated mood about what he might get asked about. And so he was laying down a warning flag, and we've both been on the receiving end of attacks from him. He is, in my view, a subject I cover. We have spoken to him in the course of our daily reporting during news events and at either press conferences or on Air Force One or so forth. But we have actually spent very little time talking directly to him during this presidency, and that is a choice that we have made for a variety of reasons. But he has a specific fascination with the New York Times, and you know that. We've seen it over and over again. And I think just in his mind, he associates me with it. But for whatever reason, he never totally closes the door with anybody. And for our purposes, we had fact-checking questions we needed to ask him, and we needed to give him an opportunity to respond to, but we did not want it to be sort of open mic night in that kind of an interview where he was just going to pontificate. We asked a series of detailed questions, and he answered most of them.
So when you started at the New York Post, what was your first interaction with Donald Trump as a reporter?
Yeah, I've actually tried remembering my first one. I mean, the first clip that I have a byline on where he's quoted, I don't think it was me who spoke to him. I think there were three other names on the story, and it was after a Swiss Air plane crash. And he told whoever it was among us that had spoken to him that he had just gotten off the phone with one of the people who had been identified as having been killed in this crash, and I think it was a Swiss watchmaker or something. And he said that he was just about to start doing a product line with this person. I don't know whether that was true. It's obviously can't be verified. But he was in the ether. I was covering the rebuilding at the World Trade Center, and he did this plan about how he would unveiled something, how he was going to rebuild it exactly like it was. He did not own anything connected to the site, but he did want to be associated with it. When I started covering him most rigorously was in 2011, very end of 2010 and beginning of 2011, when he was looking at running for president. And that was the year that he started talking about birtherism in the middle of this proto-campaign or pseudo-campaign. And he watched his poll numbers take off. And the year later was the first time that he ever attacked me on Twitter. It's just what he does. So it's been a long, very similar ride, Lawrence. But I will tell you that I did a piece with Ben Smith when I was at Politico in 2011 about what Trump was doing and whether he was serious and whether he might run. And so much of that piece could have run at any point from 2011 until 2020. And one of the things that we talk about in this book is how much of this term has become the result of hubris, of his belief that he can get through any situation because he has before. But what you're seeing right now, particularly with Iran, is that he has a limited number of tricks, right? He has a limited number of tools in this kit. And it's coming up against reality and the limits of what he can bend it to.
Jonathan, where were you when you read that Truth Social thing on Friday about Maggie, and what did you feel when you were reading that?
He's done it so much that we were both expecting something. We knew something was going to come before the interview. There was no way. I mean, firstly,
is it at the point where you laugh at this? Is there any sting in it when you read it? I mean, the words are so ugly.
He's been calling me maggot since my last book came out. I mean, literally, since actually I haven't published yet. And so it's been like half a dozen times or something like that. I mean, you get a flurry of texts of people saying, "Did you see this?" And yes, I saw it because I get alerts for.
And you get a lot of threats. You do. I mean, after I interviewed him in 2020, it was, an inundation. We don't talk about it publicly because you don't want to encourage people. But we've had to deal with that. There's no question about it.
So when there's so much in the book, but I just want to sort of start at the end, which is when you get into the Oval Office. It reads as one of those things where he is just doing that Trump thing where he just keeps talking about stuff that has nothing to do with what you want to talk about. We saw you try to. Actually saw it on video. You were the only person we saw on video really seriously try to hold him to a thought and keep him right here and answer this about Ghislaine Maxwell or answer things about COVID death rates at the time in America. But in the Oval Office, do you have any ability to try to keep him on the point you're trying to keep him on?
We tried. I mean, and we had specific things that we wanted to give him visibility of in our reporting just as a matter of process. But it was one of the most, I've been covering Donald Trump this is 11 years consecutively, Maggie even longer. It was actually the most astonishing encounter I've had with him. He sits across from us in the Oval Office, and we'd asked him a question about power because he told Tucker Carlson he's the most powerful president ever. And he hands us a 2-page document that he says was written by a historian. And the first sentence says, Donald Trump is the most powerful man who's ever lived on the planet, et cetera, et cetera. And it goes on to compare him to, he described it as the top 10. Mao, Stalin, Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Hitler, Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun,
The Caesars.
the Caesars, William the Conqueror. There was no discussion of a moral dimension to any of this. It was about raw power. And he wasn't alarmed to be in their company. In fact, he was relishing it. He was reading it aloud. You know, Napoleon, it's very interesting. Mao, these people use fear to create power. And what became very apparent to us, which is already kind of apparent in our reporting, is he's a very different president from the first term in terms of his psychology. In the first term, he was much more reactive to domestic politics. If there was a move in his poll numbers or a gyration in the stock market, he was far more responsive. It's not to say he doesn't care about them now. It's not black and white. But now he is playing to be, you know, as he told us, essentially told us himself by giving us this document, he wants to be the capital G great man of history. He wants to reshape the world. And that risk-taking that we're seeing on the global front, I don't think he would have gone to war in Iran in the same circumstances in term one. I don't think he would have rolled the dice on what he did in Venezuela. I'm not sure, and we know because he didn't, but even with the same circumstance, he wouldn't have started a trade war with the whole world, and he didn't. But he's in a different mindset, and he's untethered from all of those domestic political considerations that he was in the first term. So that, you know, was brought to life in a very vivid way, just sitting across from him.
Yeah, when I got to that part, and then we discover who the historian was who wrote this document that he gave you, and that turned out to be?
So we said, who is this historian? And he said, oh, Natalie Harper's his aide. They call her the human printer because she prints everything for him. So she texts us this guy's name, Dave King. And so Maggie and I start Googling, who's Dave King? Is there a historian? We couldn't find any historians named Dave King. Anyway, long story short, I sort of, you know, go down this rabbit hole. He turns out to be the former caddy, golf caddy for Gary Player, the South African golfer, and that's how he got to know Donald Trump. He's a businessman, whatever. So that was the coda to that story.
This is where we have to give up to a commercial break for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to have more passages of this book for the audience. It is just an extraordinary piece of work. We're going to be back with Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan. In a crucial meeting leading up to Donald Trump's war in Iran, Donald Trump dismissed warnings about the Strait of Hormuz. When Trump joined the meeting, Radcliffe briefed him on the U.S. intelligence assessment of Netanyahu's presentation. The CIA director used one word to describe the Israeli prime minister's regime change scenario: farcical. At that point, Rubio cut in. In other words, it's bullshit, he said. Several others jumped in, including Vance, just back from Azerbaijan, who also expressed strong skepticism about the prospect of regime change. The president then turned to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane. General, what do you think? Kane replied, sir, this is, in my experience, standard operating procedure for the Israelis. They oversell, and their plans are not always well developed. They know they need us, and that's why they're hard selling. Kane shared with Trump and members of the cabinet the military assessment that a major campaign against Iran would dramatically deplete stockpiles of American weaponry with no clear path to quickly replenish. He was deeply worried about both the potential for significant American casualties and the further depletion of munitions and missile interceptors strained after years of support for Ukraine and Israel. He also flagged enormous difficulty of securing the Strait of Hormuz and the risks of Iran shutting the strait, a scenario Trump dismissed on the assumption that the regime would capitulate before it came to that. New York Times' Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan are back with us. Their new book is Regime Change Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. So in this passage, it looks pretty clear who's to blame for the strategic blunder closing the Strait of Hormuz.
Donald Trump was warned by, as you just laid out, his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of all of these potential outcomes. Again, this was not some secret. The Strait of Hormuz and the possibility of it closing has been in Pentagon wargaming scenario for years and years and years. it's hard to think that there's ever been a war or a conflict that America has entered based on anything. It was really just a gut impulse from Donald Trump. He felt that this regime was a paper tiger, that this was going to be a fast war. He just said he felt that that was going to be the case, that they were going to collapse very quickly. And so you ask yourself all these questions. You know, as we've been doing our reporting, we've obtained a lot of classified information about the number of munitions that America has. We have spent down our critical stockpiles to an alarming extent. And so you ask yourself, how did this happen? How did we get into this war where we're running out of critical munitions, the strait is closed, the gas prices, and then we do all this reporting. We go into dig into these rooms, and it turns out, well, if you assume the war is going to last sweet FA, no time at all, that's it. I mean, it's a form of magical thinking, actually, is what it all boils down to.
Except for very real consequences.
Here's another piece of magical thinking. This is from the book. Trump said he thought Gaza's 2 million residents would be happy to evacuate their uninhabitable homeland. They could return eventually, he suggested, once the war-torn strip was transformed into the Riviera of the Middle East. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too, he announced. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site, and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out. Legitimately nutso, one senior aide said later, but very on brand. The Gaza idea represented the spur-of-the-moment nature of Trump's foreign policy that many had feared. Maggie, that line, legitimately nutso, is so important for readers and for the audience to know about, because this term, the Trump team has been publicly unified. We don't see the cracks. We never hear that person. After we see Trump do something, many of us might think that's legitimately not so. We don't know there are people in the White House thinking the same thing.
This is a group of people who genuinely want to see him succeed, Lawrence. I mean, I think that is something that is just so fundamentally different from term one. And I think is hard for people to understand because people got so used to term one where a man who had never run for city council before becomes president. He doesn't know most of his government. He doesn't know most of his White House. He is working with a very small group of people who he actually knows and 2 family members. And that's really it. He has people in his government who view his world view and his behavior as dangerous and in need of a check, whether it is John Kelly or James Mattis or on and on and on. There are people who were opposed to his agenda. There were also people who believed that he was trying to exceed his authority, which were people who still liked him or who were conservatives. There's none of that now. And he touched the hot stove in 2017 of firing James Comey and got a special counsel investigation. That's also off the table now. You have people who were with him through 4 indictments, a number of civil cases, 2 assassination attempts, and him winning overwhelmingly, unlike 2016. And so they believe there is something sort of almost mystical about him, that he can hear frequencies that maybe they can't. And they hate the mainstream media more than they hate things they see him doing that they have concerns about, many of them anyway. And so you will not hear as much of that. You haven't heard as much of that. That's part of what the challenge was with reporting this book, was getting...
Well, you certainly report a lot of dissent inside the White House and disagreements with what Donald Trump's deciding.
We do. And we also show areas where there is not process, but there is certainly an effort to try to make his plans work. I would say the tariff implementation of Liberation Day was one of those. We were really struck in the reporting, and we show this in the book, how scared people inside that government were, how scared people inside that White House were. First, in the lead up to Liberation Day, when they could not get him off of what he wanted to do. This was a 40-year project that he just wanted to try. And they were scared at how close the bond markets came to just completely melting down 7 days later, which was finally what got him off of it. But again, it was the willingness to just go straight to the brink. But then he stopped. And so they all believe that he can get himself out of certain situations. And he believes it. What you are seeing now, though, Lawrence, and where I think that if people really do want to understand how this government works, I do think this book will help them do that. What is happening in these rooms? Where this goes from here is you have a president who, even there are disagreements, even if they want to see him succeed, there are people who believe that, say, habeas corpus should not be suspended. And there are people who say, let's do it. I think we can, and we'll see where it goes. Trump doesn't really want to hear from the people anymore who say, maybe this can't work. He really wants to do what he wants to do. And that is also something we are hearing inside this government. And so when you see him putting Bill Pulte in place as the director of national intelligence now, and essentially going in with a mission to fire people, a lot of what we write about in this book will help people understand how that happened.
We have to get to another commercial break. When we come back, if you think that that some members of the Trump cabinet are idiots, so do some members of the Trump cabinet. There's a passage that we have for you on that when we come back after this break. On page 37 of the book, Donald Trump says, "I'm not a big fan of Ukraine," Trump said, "except they're women. They keep winning Miss Universe." It was Ukraine that provoked Donald Trump's Secretary of the Treasury to call his Commerce Secretary an idiot. Meanwhile, the Ukraine minerals deal was also causing considerable internal dissension in the administration, along with rivalry and backbiting at senior levels. Howard Lutnick had told the president that Scott Bessent had screwed up the deal. Bessent looked at Lutnick's proposal. "This is a shitty deal. You're an idiot," he told Lutnick. Bessent went right back to the president and said, "Howard's fucked up the deal. I had an uncapped deal and we're getting revenues, not earnings." "Is that right?" Trump said. "They gave you that?" "Yes." At that, Trump started mocking Lutnick, sometimes in front of others, enjoying the sport. And we are back with New York Times reporters Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan. Their invaluable new book is Regime Change: Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. Jonathan, you got the greatest compliment a White House has ever given a book in the Inside the White House genre, created by Bob Woodward, honorably carried on by you. And this is the first time any White House in any administration has ever received such a book, accusing the authors of having obtained audio tapes of meetings in the White House, including audio tapes of meetings in the Situation Room, which is the White House way of saying this book, as far as they can tell, is 100% accurate. Is that because you have audio tapes of the Situation Room?
We're not going to comment on the tapes. All we'll say is that it is notable that there haven't been denials of very specific scenes inside the Situation Room, which include extensive dialogue.
You have, Maggie, you explain in the book the use of quotation marks. And you use quotation marks only if you got the statement from someone who was in the conversation or right there in the room when the words were said. Someone had to either say the words or hear the words for you to put it in quotation marks. Other statements are in there, they're not in quotation marks. It's someone giving you their best recollection of what was said there. But as you study the quotation marks in some of these one-on-one conversations, it seems, based on the rules, which you explained, the rules of quotation marks in the book, I would just leave it to the reader to see if you can figure out who might be the source of some of these. But what was your reaction to the White House just assuming it's so accurate they must have tapes? Again,
We're not going to discuss sourcing, including their speculation that we've seen out there. But look, we were surprised that the vice president told Megyn Kelly really that the reporting was so accurate. And we have not yet had the White House say that anything is incorrect here. It doesn't mean they won't at some point. The book comes out tomorrow. But we worked really hard to make sure that this was accurate and that we were delivering the most accurate first draft of history that we could. And so, yes, that to have the only comment we have had from the White House so far be this is accurate reporting, we agree.
So there's a lot of quotation marks around a lot of statements made by J.D. Vance and by Marco Rubio about this war in Iran. And it is very clear in your reporting that J.D. Vance is opposed to this war. He's opposed to it all the way along. When it gets down to the decision time, he basically says to the president, it's your decision, and whatever you decide, I will support. You know, I don't think this is a good idea. Marco Rubio is on the other side of that. Do you see any possibility with this kind of reporting that it's out there, what J.D. Vance's position was, what Marco Rubio's position was? Do you see that affecting their political futures, each one of them?
So it's not clear to us at all that Marco Rubio will be running for president.
No, and he says in your reporting also that he won't, or that J.D. Vance is his candidate, and that makes a certain sense.
And it could change, right? Lots of things change. But
with Donald Trump, you have playing games with both of them, asking people, who do you think is better? Asking Rupert Murdoch one time, which one of these guys do you think is better? And Murdoch praises Rubio and not J.D. Vance, but he's playing games with people about who's the better candidate.
Yes, and you're going to see a lot of that, I think, going forward. I do not think that is going to stop. In terms of the war, Rubio's view, I think, was somewhat less black and white. He, in our reporting anyway, he did believe that there were certain targets that they could meet, that regime change, obviously, he called bullshit in Iran, but that they certainly could take out the ballistic missiles program. That Trump has said various things about that since, obviously, but he certainly was not drawing the line that Vance was, at least directly to Trump. Vance was, most of the people in Trump's small circle in these discussions did not think this war was a good idea. But J.D. Vance was really the only person who directly took this to the president in a way that really wasn't especially helpful with him, for him, I believe, in that moment.
Irritated Trump.
Yeah, it irritated Trump. And so at this moment now, for Vance to be the one overseas trying to negotiate a peace, actually to a war that he didn't agree with, and that people broadly know that, it's not the worst political outcome for him, because obviously the odds that he can get that done are small, but he has, at least in his public comments, made clear that Jared Kushner came up with certain ideas here, or that, we have made some progress, but he is publicly not identified with this war, the same way certainly as the president. Whether he can navigate that line running for president, depending on what happens with this situation, I think is a big open question. It is absolutely true that this White House does not want to have the Iran war on the front page every day by the time it comes to September. J.D. Vance certainly needs it not to be if he's going to run.
A quick last word.
Well, the thing that was really notable about this White House compared to the first one is they keep talking about how they're the most transparent White House in history. It's a canard. They're actually incredibly good at keeping secrets. And
so you discover in this book,
and what's really notable, take the war, for example. You have a tiny group of people that are running this country, 5 or 6 people in Donald Trump. The Treasury Secretary of the United States, the Energy Secretary, the 2 people who would have to handle the biggest oil shock in world history, they weren't in the room.
Right.
They weren't in the meetings.
Tulsi Gabbard, not in the room.
Not in the room. You are talking about a tiny group of people. And again, one of the things we try to do in this book is, if you're curious about how this country is being run, how decisions are being made, that's what you need to understand.
I could go on, but the control room insists the network needs a commercial. This is the book of the year, Regime Change Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. It's available everywhere. You can pre-order. Actually, you can walk into a bookstore tomorrow and finally get it in your hands. It's already #1 on every bestseller list that exists. Get your name on the waiting list at the library and get your hands on it. Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, thank you very much for this book. Thank you for bringing it here tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us.
We'll be right back with Andrew Weissman. In Regime Change, Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan write, foreign investors saw a more straightforward path to influence, putting money directly into the pockets of the Trump family through their crypto ventures. There was so much capitulation, so much conquest, so much corruption. It became hard to follow. Joining us now is Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and MS Now legal analyst. He's the author of the bestseller Liar's Kingdom: How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. Andrew, this book is a confirmation of an awful lot of suspicions.
It is, and the issue of corruption, sort of focusing on sort of like what I used to do for a living, is one that I do not think we will know the full scope until there is an administration, an honest administration that is going to be looking into this. I was struck by what Jonathan Swan said about, they like to say they're the most transparent administration. That's a canard, and I think that's right in terms of the level and the funneling of money into Donald Trump's pockets, either directly or indirectly, is the kind of thing that I think we're going to be reading about that in years to come in ways that are going to be truly shocking.
Well, they get into real detail in the book about the whole cryptocurrency business that the Trump family set up that benefits Donald Trump, and all these foreign investors and Middle Eastern massive billion-dollar investments that have poured into it very directly, just handing the president money.
Yeah, so, we see that in terms of how that could influence foreign policy. We see it in a much more small bore way in terms of getting pardons. But in my world, which is sort of thinking about the rule of law and the Justice Department, that is, completely being eradicated because what you heard from the reporting is there is no systems in place. Donald Trump doesn't care about that. This is something he's completely ignoring, and it's like no one's going to stop him. And so you're getting all of these reports of basically this is how much a pardon costs you, and whether that is being grifted by middlemen or it's actually being conducted from the top. We need to know that in the future, but we're seeing it here, we're seeing it overseas in ways that this book suggests there really are no rules that are holding any of these people to account.
So the book also makes the point that in a previous administration, if you had been doing business with the Saudis and you're actually actively in business with the Saudis, no one would ask you to go negotiate with the Saudis. And in the Trump administration, they consider that an asset. If you're actually in business with these people, then you know them. And that's a good way to start off the negotiations, that you're already in business with these different people.
Well, there actually were rules against that. And, when I was investigating Paul Manafort during the Mueller investigation, and we were looking at his history, when he was working in connection with the Reagan administration, he had asked for a waiver because he had been working for overseas entities, but said, oh, I also now want to be working for you. And the Reagan administration was like, under no circumstances is that going to happen. You need to be solely loyal to American interests. There's America first. And that's a way of reminding people this is not a political issue. This is the way that, sort of law-abiding Republican and Democratic administrations have operated until now. I'm not saying that everyone has always been, above board, but like that was the norm that was supposed to be adhered to. Here, you just have a real sense of that idea of, as Jonathan Swan said, when he could list 10, sort of his leaders throughout history, there was no sense of morality in comparing himself to Napoleon and Hitler. That should be deeply worrying to people.
Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
That is tonight's last word. The book is Regime Change, available now.